Welcome to the Hyper Voice. I am your host, Stephen Morioka. I am joined by Alex Underhill.
Hello, Stephen.
And a very special guest for our very first history segment. He is the 2009 US National Champion, as well as a developer of RNG Reporter, Mike Suleski.
Stephen, thanks for having me on.
All right. It is excellent that you are here. We are very pleased to have you. And Alex, why don't you tell us the specific title that we've given to the history segments?
Well, these special episodes that we've decided to center around the history of VGC, we're calling them Roar of Time.
Sounds pretty appropriate.
That's right. Full title credit goes to Alex there. You know, when we were first planning the show, basically something he came up with, and I love that title, so we stuck with it. But we have Mike Suleski here just because we're going all the way back to VGC's first official season in 2009, and he had an amazing season that year. And basically what we wanted to do is introduce everyone to VGC's first year in 2009. And Mike, why don't we just get started with you? Tell everyone what it was like playing VGC in 2009. So what was the schedule like? How did things work back then?
All right. So back then things were very different from what they were now. Kind of fairly undeveloped. The tournament structure was single elimination, and best of one basically. Throughout the entire tournament, there was no best of three anywhere except for higher level tournaments like World or Nationals. And each regional event, there were 6 of them in that season alone. Only 6 opportunities to qualify for the exclusive national championship. Only the top 4 got to continue on. Now, there's also no team preview as well. There was no any sort of official facilities within the game itself for official tournaments.
I always thought that was interesting with the lack of team preview, because then since you have nothing to base off your opponent, you have no team to base what you're going to lead against it. Did you just kind of lead the same 2 Pokemon every game?
I basically did. My team was geared around I tried to have my leads handle as many types of possible teams as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, would you like me to explain my team in general?
I think we'll get into the team later. I just was asking how team preview kind of affected your mindset going into a tournament. Or the lack of team preview, I guess.
I'm not sure we thought that far ahead back then. I mean, this is, still a very primitive stage. We didn't think about a lot of things that we do now that we take for granted. There's a lot of player knowledge of second nature.
I gotcha. And so you explained a bit of the tournament structure, but how was it for you personally? Like, what events did you travel to, and how did you qualify for nationals and stuff like that?
Of the 6 regionals, I only traveled to 2 of them. The first one was Phoenix, in my own backyard, basically, where I actually lost first round and was eliminated with the same team that I used to win nationals, more or less.
Wow, that's rough.
It was. But it was a very good theoried team. But I never actually practiced once with it.
How would you practice?
How did I practice?
I said, how would you practice then?
See, that's the thing. You'd have to find friends who are into VGC and have teams ready to practice with. And I believe the simulators back then didn't allow for doubles very well, or weren't coded very well. You also had Pokemon Battle Revolution, where you could randomly fight people, but most of the time these were not VGC rules. These were just people with uber legendaries, Rayquaza, Kyogre, Groudon. Nothing you could really practice against. So I basically had to theory mod my team and cross my fingers, hope for the best.
Yeah, and speaking of just theory modding your team and being able to practice, despite having all those having an opportunity to practice against some friends or opponents online on either Pokemon Battle Revolution or through really the new Wi-Fi system in terms of Pokemon. But another thing is, before even getting into the tournament, like even considering playing, there was still another hurdle you had to cross. Being that it was VGC's first year, the first time TPCI had ever run events, really, in a season-like circuit, they basically had a limit on the number of people that could enter. So how did they handle the tournament structure that way?
Oh, that was pretty terrible. They had to have a lottery, essentially, where you entered, and if you were lucky enough to be picked, you got to play. I was lucky enough to get to play to be drawn by the lottery at the 2 regionals I went to, Phoenix and Nashville. And that was actually extremely lucky. Most players who tried to play that year didn't even get to any regionals, or didn't even get to any regional lotteries.
So about how many people typically entered into one of these lotteries, and how many people were taken?
I think, if I recall, Philadelphia had upwards of 600 people entering the lottery, and less than 200 were picked, ultimately, to play.
Yes, I remember that. There was I think every regional and the nationals, which also had a lottery, they all had at least over the minimum number of players they wanted for the tournament, so they had to go through the lottery. And I remember Philadelphia because I went to that one too. Drove all the way from Chicago, and all those locals who came there too, didn't get picked. I ended up getting picked, and it was just, hilarious, because of that system, really.
Oh yeah, that was a terrible year. In fact, I know that there were quite a few players who had already been in the previous Worlds. I think Ray Rizzo tried to play in VGC 2009, but wasn't lucky enough to be picked by the lottery. He could have played at Worlds that year too. That could have been the first year he won Worlds, if it were not for the lottery.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe he would have. He might have 4 World Championships now.
I'm thinking back on it. In terms of equipment they used, that was also a big barrier to how many people they could allow into the venue. They had these developer DS units that are provided by Nintendo, and they only had 100 or so of these available. And I think they may have used these for videos, for video capture, I believe, and display on the TV. But the fact that they had to haul all this equipment around for players to use instead of nowadays when you have to bring your own 3DS and we don't have to do anything special, that was a huge barrier to how many people they could allow into a tournament.
How did hack checking go about back in those days?
Oh, well, I could tell you stories, but it really varied from tournament to tournament. Some, I believe, in some cases, players were hack checked via basically the tournament organizer's discretion. They saw things like you have multiples of a certain TM in your bag, like grass knot. I believe I know someone who was disqualified for having 2 or more grass knot TMs in their bag, even though they could have easily traded them over from another game.
Just trade it, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. This is back then when TMs were single use, not like in Gen 6 where you could use a TM multiple times. Exactly.
And so, what was it like putting together a team back then in 2009?
Well, like I said, you mostly had to theorem on it, and I honestly can't speak for other players' team building strategies. I can only talk about my own, and it was actually based on another player's earlier successes in the Journey Across America circuit 3 years earlier. I believe his name was David Stone, or Obi on Smogon, as he was called back then. So the team strategy was an Infernape holding a Focus Sash next to a Choice Scarf Explosion Metagross. Back then, this is when Explosion would actually have the defense of the targets, so it was effectively 500 base power, not 250 as it is nowadays. So it actually stood a pretty good chance of KOing both opponent Pokemon. And so Blaziken would either fake out or feint to knock out at least one of the protects. And usually, if this was successful, both opponents would be KO'd. I would have my Blaziken with 1 HP on the field, and I would next bring in my Togekiss. That would use Follow Me to if necessary, to redirect any priority attacks away from Blaziken, so you could use Endeavor and take out another Pokemon down to 1 HP as well. So this is a good way to get games over very quickly. It was very versatile, could be used against a lot of teams. In the case where there was, like, say, a very bulky Trick Room team with Bronzong or Dusknoir, for example, Metagross was holding could trick its Choice Scarf onto them, and I could run a more protracted, drawn-out battle against the Trick Room team, but still had a pretty strong advantage. So that was the general strategy for most games. Against more experienced opponents, I would get a little fancier, but we can talk about that later when we explore the nationals and Nashville regional tournaments.
Just to make sure I'm on the right page, Mike, which firefighting starter are we talking about?
We're talking about Infernape.
All right. And yeah, it seems like a really fun strategy using such a high base power move and just exploding right off the bat. We saw that come back a bit this season with things like Landorus and Dialga, but it hasn't been quite the same ever since they took away the high base power of Explosion, or the having defense effect of it.
Yeah, but back then, in Gen 4, Explosion was one of the most feared moves.
I believe Azelf was a common user of it? Or was Azelf not allowed in VGC?
It was allowed. I faced it in the finals of the Nationals that year.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of Pokemon, there was really only Tyranitar who was banned. You know, the format wasn't really a national dex that year. Just Tyranitar was banned because of its level, because Pokemon had to be at level 50 or below. If you were, say, EV training a Pokemon to go above 50, and accidentally went above 50, then it would not be allowed to play.
Yeah, that's correct, Steven. It wasn't until 2010 when Heart and Gold and Soul Silver introduced auto leveling in link battles, where Tyranitar and the other legendaries that were above level 50 could be allowed.
Okay, but to summarize, you had 6 US regionals run through pretty much in 6 weeks in the US. Europe had maybe 4 or 5 nationals, I can't remember at this point. Then for the US at least, and that was it for the VGC season. There was nothing else around the world except for Japan. You had top 4 from each of those regionals go to nationals, and then the nationals had a lottery as well. You have 1 game, single elimination, and no team preview for the entire season. And that was that. But being as VGC's first season, players now had to move on from playing on online simulators to obtaining their Pokemon in-game. And this is a big part of where, Mike, you came in specifically to talk about RNG Reporter, which is, we'll let you describe it, but this is really what allowed players to get their Pokemon in-game to compete at these tournaments at the highest level.
Oh, that's right. So, I'm going to start off by explaining that in the past, it was hugely time-consuming to get Pokemon with perfect stats for tournaments. Generation 6 and XY introduced 2 new mechanics that made it a lot easier for players to get Pokemon with the best stats they can for tournaments. So, if you're a player who just started playing competitively in the past 3 years, you probably take these features for granted. Like the Destiny Knot breeding mechanism, which allows for passing of 5 stats or IVs from the parents instead of just 3, as it was since Generation 3. For example, and let me illustrate the impact of this. In the past, the odds of getting a Pokemon with 5 flawless IVs, I mean, just HP attack, or one of the attack stats, defense, both defenses, and then speed. The odds of breeding one of those, assuming you had 1 flawless Ditto parent, was 1 in 4,200. Compare that to today, where it's 1 in 10. Basically, you just need, a little more than 10 eggs, and you are set with 1 Pokemon for your team. And that was practically impossible in the past. Especially, and if you want to run a mixed set, we need both attack stats flawless. That's in prior to Generation 6, that was 1 in over 76,000. And that's not even counting things like nature or ability, if you have to get that correctly as well. There was no ability capsule to adjust your ability if you hatched the wrong one. So that could be even higher, 1 in 150, 100, it could go in the millions, essentially. So, luckily, it was discovered by some Japanese players that the random number generator used for Pokemon could be manipulated by changing the DS clock. That was used to control the random number generator, essentially. And so players could basically, using some calculators, some tools that we created, such as RNG Reporter, at will adjust the DS clock and create and make their perfect Pokemon bred or legendaries appear whenever they wanted. This is even worse for legendaries as well, because in Gen 6, legendaries are guaranteed to have 3 flawless stats, at least. But in the past, it was basically a crapshoot for all of them. So manipulation was an absolute necessity if you wanted perfect Pokemon for a tournament.
So Mike, what about getting stuff like 0 IVs and like speed or something like that, or a 0 attack stat? Did people even bother going for stuff like that?
Speed, especially for Trick Room teams. In that case, one could use RNG manipulation to capture a 0 speed IV Ditto to use as a parent for the breeding chain.
And then my other question was, when people wanted to get a regular Pokemon besides a legendary, how exactly did they go about RNGing it? Did they RNG some good parents? Did they hatch an egg and then RNG the time they hatched at it? I'm still quite unfamiliar with how you obtained these Pokemon with flawless stats.
Okay, so when the game passes down or generates the IV spread for a hatchling, it determines. Back then, it determined three stats at random, and then chose 3 random stats to be passed down for the parents. So what RNG manipulation did was we tried to find a spread is the term we used to where 3 flawless stats were randomly assigned, and made sure that the 3 random stats passed on by the parents would go into the other 3 stat slots.
Okay, so and then from there, would you just go on to breed the Pokemon you wanted, and what were the odds of getting that perfect Pokemon hatched, including like abilities and stuff like that? You might not even know the exact numbers, but just like ballpark.
I mean, again, it's what for a fully flawless Pokemon, it could be at the minimum 1 in 76,000, just back then. So, but with RNG manipulation, you could do it at will whenever you wanted.
Okay, I get it now.
And this is very different from actually modifying the game. This can be done without any hacking of the game whatsoever. So, it was a boon to many players. It felt like a way they could get their perfect Pokemon without having to break out the action replay or whatnot.
Yeah, I felt like that was one of the beauties of really just RNG Reporter. You just have this program, you're also just using an external clock, and there's nothing else touching your DS in obtaining these Pokemon. You're just, using these different, manipulating the RNG to really bending it to your will to get the Pokemon that you want. And that was just one of the beauties of it. It's last year was really in 2013 where it was needed in order to be effective for VGC, really. And just beautiful program. Mike, I just wanted to ask you though, what were some of the biggest struggles in terms of developing this?
I think one of the biggest struggles was actually researching the mechanics, especially when it came to the 5th generation, where we didn't understand at all how the clock was used and how it affected the RNG then. And it took me learning a lot of reverse engineering the game, to learning assembly and just following all the instructions to figure out how it works. And it's actually one of my proudest achievements in reverse engineering there. But then after that, that's the fun part. But actually programming RNG Reporter, including all the all these various techniques, as we kept experimenting and reverse engineering the game, we found, all sorts of ways you had to get creative, basically.
No, I mean, I see where you're going with it. That it was a complex process and system, and I think just a lot of people didn't appreciate all the work you put into it, because without you developing this, the RNG Reporter, that a bunch of people wouldn't have the competitive Pokemon they needed, basically from 2013 and prior to that. So, just a huge thank you.
Thanks, Steven. Actually, now that I think about it, a lot of the thanks go to the people who worked to learn the process. Now that I think about the distribution of Pokemon, method actually changed a lot in between once Generation 6 came out. Because back then, you'd have a select, smaller group of RNGers who RNG the Pokemon for a larger set of players to use. Whereas now, anyone can breed their own Pokemon themselves, essentially. Or soft reset for their own legendaries, and it's much more feasible.
That was largely what got me into the game right around 2014, was I saw that it was possible for me to create my own team in-game and with these flawless stats because of the new breeding mechanics. And so I saw that it was a lot easier now, and I didn't have to understand anything complex or hack to get legal Pokemon. And so I just started breeding my own teams, and then from there, that's how I got here.
Yeah, the changes in Generation 6 have done a lot more to bring more people into the fold rather than RNG Reporter and the help of all these RNGers made it possible, but only these major changes to the game made it available to a wider audience.
Exactly. It really allowed VGC to grow. And just exactly that story Alex was just telling us is that situation of, hey, I want to be able to breed my own Pokemon, build my own competitive team in-game without, having to learn this crazy, sometimes rather steep learning curve and difficult program. I actually wanted to ask you, of all the VGC players from, when RNG Reporter was needed, what percentage of them could really use the program effectively just to create their teams? What would be your estimate?
I think it would be generous to say 25% of serious players in VGC actually knew how to use RNG Reporter and RNG for their own Pokemon. Maybe, probably even less than that. 15%.
That sounds about right, and, that's still shockingly low for what you would want for a competitive scene.
And so that's why you had people like you said, who are these RNGers that would help distribute the Pokemon to their friends and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
But what I'm wondering is, cloning was still existed then, right?
It did. But that couldn't be accomplished without, again, action replay or the cheat devices.
Yes. And so I'm guessing people, found the RNG manipulation to get a certain rare Pokemon, like a legendary with perfect stats, and then they could clone it from there and distribute it amongst their friends.
Thinking about it, RNG manipulation didn't actually take off until after 2009. In fact, at my Nationals run, half my Pokemon were not RNG'd. In fact, had not flawless stats at all. I think, only my Infernape had only 231 IVs. The rest were just pretty random 18s or 20s, etc. My Togekiss, not flawless. Again, only 231s. In fact, the only fully RNG'd Pokemon was my Cresselia, which also happened to be shiny and had hidden power ground.
All right, that's quite the combo. And, since we're talking about this team, I'm sure that the viewers have heard you mention bits and pieces of it a lot now. I guess now we could probably talk about what led you to using those 6 and then bringing those 6 to regionals and nationals. Do you want to tell us about that experience?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going back through my old notes from 2009 and trying to remember what my battles were like.
So, Mike, actually, I think earlier you already described, kind of the lead game for your team with the Infernape, Metagross, Togekiss. You just mentioned you had Cresselia on the team. Your other Pokemon were kind of cleanup members. What were their roles and what were they?
So essentially, I had Infernape and Metagross, and plus Togekiss combo, taking down as many Pokemon as they could very quickly, with Cresselia in the back with Calm Mind and Rest. So it could, as basically the last man standing, could hopefully stall out any other Pokemon they had on the field. Now, when I used it in my regional run, it was originally just Shadow Ball and Hidden Power Ground for coverage, because back then my mindset was still try to get as much coverage as possible because we had no team preview, at all. So I tried to make my team members as versatile as possible instead of doing one thing really well, like most teams are built nowadays. So, yeah, essentially Infernape, which had the moves Heat Wave, Fake Out, Feint, and Endeavor, paired with Metagross, holding Choice Scarf, had Iron Head, Rock Slide, Explosion, and Trick. Togekiss, which had Air Slash, Follow Me, Protect, and Extreme Speed for picking off Pokemon after they've been reduced to 1 HP by Endeavor. In my regional run, I originally had... I had Cresselia, but with Shadow Ball, which I later, at Nationals, decided to change to Icy Wind, which is, as far as I know, the first use of Icy Wind as a measure of speed control in 2009. The speed control wasn't actually a term we used back then, but it's second nature. It's in the player lexicon nowadays.
Are you talking about me?
Nope. Sorry, Alex.
But anyway, another question that I had was it interesting having, I guess like you mentioned before, that all these mechanics were second nature, but something weird for me to imagine is just move priority. You mentioned Extreme Speed and how I believe that was it +2 back then in 4th gen?
It was +1.
It was +1, and I believe Fake Out was also +1, wasn't it?
Yeah, Fake Out was +1, Extreme Speed was +1, only Follow Me was +3 back then.
Yes, it was +3, and it was actually +3 all the way till 2013, I believe? Or was it not? Or did they reduce it in the 5th gen?
It was reduced... Well, let me think about this. It was reduced in Gen 6, actually, from +3 to +2.
Oh, okay, because I remember it used to be able to redirect Fake Outs if you were fast enough.
Yeah, that's right. That can't be done anymore.
You could do that with your Nationals team. You could redirect Fake Outs with your Togekiss.
Oh, extremely useful. Yes.
And I understand that Fake Out was Fake Out's always been a popular move in VGC, but it was just as popular then, so...
Of course.
That has a lot of utility.
Yeah, I just really like the design of that team. We actually played each other during your Nationals run in round 4 out of 5 in Swiss, and there are only 5 rounds just because they split the player pool into 4 flights. And I felt the full wrath of this team. It was... I want to say it was a close match, but maybe not so much. I have an old battle video that I'll upload eventually, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But, I just really love the design of the team. You have a lot of options up front. Infernape's Focus Sash, when Metagross blows up, you can activate Blaze for Heat Waves later. You have the Endeavor option. You have Togekiss's Redirection, and then picking off weakened foes after you've Endeavored. And then you just have cleanup at the end. And like you mentioned before, when you face Trick Room Pokemon, such as Bronzong or Dusknoir, you had Trick on Metagross just to, lock them into a move. So likely they'll be reversing their Trick Room. Just extremely amazing team. Just looking at your runs through that season, you got second at the Nashville Regional, first at US Nationals, and then 14th at Worlds, later that August. But I recall that in the finals of both that regional and nationals, you played the same opponent.
That's right.
How did things go with that?
That would be my friend Alan Liu, also known as Imperfect Luck. He's retired from Pokemon. I think he's been trying to get... he's been getting in a lot of other things now. But we do have quite the story when it comes to our attending the national regional, because we're both from Arizona. So we had to drive cross country 3,000 miles through, dealing with state troopers, heavy rains, exploding tires, and some mysterious baby seat in the back.
Whoa, what's this about?
We never found out, but for whatever reason, this truck had a baby seat in the back, and the state troopers, were wondering about that, but luckily they let us go. Anyway, so yeah, after we drove cross country and just crossed the fingers, hope we got past the lottery. We actually both got picked by the lottery, and ended up playing all the way to the finals, where I thought I had the game in the bag. The video is on YouTube somewhere, but then I made a mistake because I was thinking about a simulator's glitchy trick mechanics. It didn't handle trick correctly, and I thought the game would behave the way it would on the simulator called Shoddy Battle back then. And that's what ultimately caused me to lose the game there. But I got my comeuppance against them at nationals when we both made it all the way to the finals once more. So, by the way, Steven, I actually happen to have notes on our nationals match. Would you like me to talk about that?
I want you to talk about it.
I mean, I remember your war story from nationals. Just I think reading it years ago. Back maybe in 2010 or 11. I just remember like your road trip for the regional and stuff from nationals and worlds too. But I would love to hear what you have.
All right. So, it looks to me like you had a pretty unlucky first turn. You led with Dusk Noir and Metagross. You protected with Metagross, but I tricked my Choice Scarf onto your Dusk Noir. And then it got burned by Heatwave.
Yeah, sounds right.
You got Trick Room to set up, but next turn you decided to explode. Infernape survived with my Focus Sash. My Metagross still survived with half health. So, that was a pretty safe combo back then, having the exploding next to a ghost while you Trick Room. That was pretty safe back then. And then Heatwave finished off your Dusk Noir as it was boosted by Blaze. So it was down 3-2. Infernape and what was it? My Cresselia and I think maybe my Togekiss. 3-2 against your Zapdos and Swampert, where you use the classic Discharge and Earthquake combo with the electric immunity. You still had Trick Room up, so at this point I had to kind of try to stall out Trick Room. I wanted to preserve my Infernape and my Metagross until Trick Room expired. Yes, that's right.
For the end game?
For the end game. So I brought in my Togekiss and Cresselia. It managed to survive long enough even against your discharges. Just enough to stall at Trick Room to get a little Air Slash off. Then Cresselia started buffing up with Calm Mind. And managed to... Got paralyzed by Discharge. Had to rest it off. Once Trick Room expired, I got your Swampert, your bulkiest Pokemon, down to 1 HP. It had a Citrus Berry, though, so it didn't drop from the Icy Wind after. And Metagross had to finish it off. I wanted to take the risk. I was going for the Rock Slide, maybe, hoping to hit Zap, which could have ended the game right there. Take out your Zapdos and your Swampert in one hit. But if Cresselia is paralyzed, I was really afraid that I would just get endless full paralysis and never get to finish it off. So I had to go with the safe route, and just take out the Swampert with Metagross and Zapdos faced Cresselia alone. It was really tense there because I was still worried about a critical hit getting past the Calm Minds or multiple full paralysis, but that's how it ended.
Right, yeah, I think I do recall that ending with Zapdos versus Cresselia, and I was still banking on I need to get lucky to win this pretty much, but I felt like that match or that game pretty much just once I was down to 2 Pokemon, you had the Calm Mind and Cresselia, and I felt like there's not much I can do against this thing anymore. So I felt like you had the right game plan, was just waiting Trick Room out, and even with it, Cresselia was in a good position to just clean up the game because Timer wasn't a thing back then, and either
No.
It was just non-existent. So obviously I didn't. It's not like I lost to Just some random player. It was amazing to see you win the whole thing, later on, a few days, I found out a day later or 2 days later, whenever it was, that you ended up winning. So how could I feel bad about that?
Hey, it's amazing to still see you around at these tournaments after 7 years, Steven.
Yeah, same to you. We were complete strangers back then, which is kind of funny.
I know. It's pretty amazing. I'm glad we've stuck, we stuck around.
Yeah, and so Worlds, that would have been your first Worlds that year in 2009. It was very small. I looked at the roster from that year. There was only 28 players in Worlds that year from, the US, a few European countries. I want to say like France, Germany, and Spain, maybe UK too, and Japan. And that was it.
And look where we are now.
Yeah, that was the point where, with all these Japanese players in Top Cut, we'd kind of expected that they were still way ahead of us in the game, and that we'd, never get to really Top Cut at Worlds in a long time. Until, Ray Rizzo proved us all wrong 1 year later.
Right. It was him and then the Chambers brothers and Hui Ha who broke through in 2010, gave us a Top Cut appearances. Ray made that deep run to win his first title, but, that's this whole story for another time. I feel we could do on a different Roar of Time. But, it was true. Like Japan, it felt like they were this extreme powerhouse of a nation for Pokemon. And, I think it was another Japanese player that won that year too.
Yeah, I think part of what contributed to that, air of mystery and dominance was some of the crazy strategies they used. I believe the second place finalist at Worlds had a Shedinja and a Hippowdon with Sandstream on the same team.
Oh my goodness.
I know. Can you believe that?
That sounds ridiculous. That's so funny to hear.
I mean, even though Worlds was best of 2 out of 3 tournament, it still just goes to show what no team preview can do to you in a format like that.
Yeah, we always thought that they knew something we didn't, but turns out actually nobody had any idea what was going on. Nobody had really developed the game by then.
That's true. There's really, it was VGC's first season, I guess, if you want to count the 2008 stuff, where like 1.5 maybe. But there's really no metagame development. There wasn't that much of a real competitive scene in the community. Like, we were still just a branch off of Smogon at that point. And, we were very new, very young that year, like still really completing our first year of existence. And now here we are 7 or 8 years later, whatever it is. I feel like VGC's absolutely more established than we were then. And, we just have all this different type of content and then players, people can learn from. And in 2009, as really our first season, we didn't have any of this. And it's just a huge change. And, it's been a pleasure, watching the scene grow year after year. Do you guys want to talk about anything else? RNG, VGC season?
Let me see. Oh, I didn't get to finish talking about my team. But it was my last team members were more of the same, bulky cleanup that could handle multiple Pokemon in a 1-on-1 situation or 1 versus 2 situation by using buffing moves. I believe I had Snorlax with, Return, Crunch, Curse, and Rest, as well as an Empoleon with, let me think about this. I should also point out that back then you could actually, between rounds, in the case of you could decide if you wanted to move your items to another Pokemon. Your items were not locked to the same set. So I basically had a Chesterberry I could move around to any of my 3 resting Pokemon, depending on how I felt, what kind of game plan I wanted to go with. Not that I knew what game plan I really wanted to go with ahead of time, but in the Top Cut of Nationals, we did have a best 2 of 3 set, and that did come in handy at times, and sometimes not as handy because there were in one set, I believe against Linduel, aka Alcapimp, I actually forgot to put a Chesterberry on my resting Snorlax, and it woke up, and so basically had to sleep for 2 turns, not doing anything. I almost lost that one, but I managed to recover. And the last Pokemon was an Empoleon with Hydro Pump, Hidden Power Electric, Iron Defense, and Rest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it had its moments, but I didn't use it very much. Is basically the first 5 I used. Infernape, Metagross, Togekiss, Cresselia, sometimes Snorlax, sometimes Empoleon.
I think one of the most interesting things that I do know about 2009's national final is that you guys played on Pokemon Battle Revolution.
That's true. I actually remember it very fondly because we got, especially the music, the final battle music of the player called Mysterial, the character.
Okay.
Because that's what played in the finals, and it gives me tingles every time I hear it.
I bet it does.
So you played holding like a Wii remote, and you had your DSs hooked up to individual Wiis, I believe?
Individual Wiis that were somehow connected.
Okay.
And this is using a custom build of Pokemon Battle Revolution. They even had the Pokemon Platinum trainer outfits included, which the normal game does not have. So this is specially designed for Pokemon VGC.
It's funny that I look at that as like something that's so cool, even though we already have that basically on our 3DSs now. We have those 3D models, and that was like the big deal then, was you got to use these 3D models in battle instead of the 2D sprites that you were so used to playing with. And so it's funny that I still look at it as something really cool, even though I have full access to playing with 3D models on my 3DS.
I know. I just love these custom solutions they have to come up with sometimes. It was... it's cool that, on rare occasions we got official support from the head company. Even though it was kind of limited, still pretty cool. One thing also to note, this didn't come up, but apparently Pokemon Battle Revolution has this glitch where spread moves, where they normally have 75% power against double targets, they will also have 75% power against a single target in a double battle. Luckily, it didn't come up in any of the matches as far as I know, but it could have. And also important, this was the first case where we had a move timer, 60 seconds per move. Not a battle timer. Those could go on as long as you wanted, but it was nice to have. And it really put the pressure on in the finals, where we had been only playing on the DS before with no time limit whatsoever.
Right. That does sound kind of strange, though. You're playing the whole tournament without a move timer like that, and then all of a sudden in the finals, I only have 60 seconds to make my move. But I understand where that could come in as a nice change.
Yeah. But at that point, I felt like I'd gotten a good sense of Alan as a player, so I got to make some really gutsy calls at turn 1. I predicted him to protect turn 1 with his Azelf, and went for the Feint. And this is especially gutsy back then, because in Gen 4, when Feint was first introduced, it had absolutely no effect, did no damage if the target did not use Protect or Detect. So it could have been a totally wasted move, but it was the right call to make. Just based on how I knew him as a player. It's one of the rare cases where player knowledge of your opponent is that really helped me in a serious VGC situation. So I'm kind of proud of that.
Well, we are proud of you as well. You are our first US National Champion, and since we're moving into Continentals, this season.
Well, hold on. Let me get a little technical here. The first U.S. National Champion was actually Ian Garvey back in the year 2000 with Pokemon Yellow.
Oh, we're going way back.
That's way back, but that's before VGC was even a thing.
We said you're the first VGC champion, Mike. Just take it, accept it, accept your title. But as you were saying, Steven,
Mike was, just wrapping up. You were our first VGC U.S. National Champion. Ian Garvey's a really cool guy. He won that back in 2000. You just mentioned. And who knows if we'll have a technical U.S. National Champion next season, just because we're moving to a Continental Championship. And that pretty much wraps up our Roar of Time segment. on 2009. Obviously there's still a lot of different things we could have talked about. A lot of interesting things. We had the way the lottery worked. We didn't even mention Nick McCord.
Oh, that's right. So yeah, we cannot forget about Nick McCord because he is one of the pillars of the community for many years, actually. A lot of people looked up to him. He was a stand-up comedian turned Pokemon announcer when he found about it in a Craigslist ad, or a friend mentioned it to him. Basically, Pokemon flew him around to all these regionals. He was commenting. We had a regionals commentator officially. This is amazing back then, not including that one year where we had Hulk Hogan commentating Journey Across America.
I really wanted to mention Hulk.
Yeah.
Hulk Hogan.
I knew we had to. But Nick was great. He had a lot of experience, talking in front of audience. Even though he didn't have a lot of experience with Pokemon himself, he played Pokemon Crystal, so he had some idea. But we all loved him. We were lucky to have him from 2009 to 2013, which is officially his last year commentating. We got him on video screen in 2014, but I think that was it.
Yeah, the last homage to him during that Nationals.
He's got bigger and better things going on in his life right now, and he's very happy. But I get to see him every now and then. We're lucky to have him. Yes,
we were very lucky. And just moving forward from the past to the present, I kind of want to just wrap up with a question for you guys from a user named Tade. And basically he asks us, with a new season starting, what are your thoughts on regions without official support in any way? So no premier challenges being provided. And the regions he mentions are like Finland, Lithuania, Poland, which aren't close enough with regionals and mid-season showdowns to be worth it for some people. And he is also wondering about a lack of major events in the Middle East, and should organized play focus more on making the game more worldwide and less pay to win? What do you guys think?
Well, all right, Steven, it's important to point out that organized play generally only reaches out to areas that have really made an effort to get involved in the Pokemon community. So if you have no PCs in your area, someone in your area, that may be you yourself, have to start learning how to organize these tournaments yourself, building a scene. And when that happens, when you've learned how to become a judge, taking the online exams, I believe, I'm not sure how that works. I've never taken it myself, but only then, when those areas start putting the effort, will organized play reach out and start involving them in the world scene.
Yeah, I have to agree with Mike here. Is you got to start laying the ground for it first. You got to make sure that there's enough interest in the area and that you have somebody who is willing to organize these events. And so, if you want, if your area is pretty barren for Pokemon events, you might have to be that person that steps up and starts hosting events yourself, just to get other people to start getting interested. And then from there, you can work it out with your friends so that maybe you and one other person start hosting events, and then you can attend each other's events or something like that. But in order to get organized play to notice you, you have to start creating a competitive scene for people to get interested into the Pokemon VGC.
Yeah, gonna go pretty much along the same lines as both of you. You need to generate a scene of some kind, whether it's yourself or you can convince some friends or some other people in the area to start working on promoting these type of events. And, no matter where you live, whether you're in a small region for VGC or one that has a bunch of events in some of the other major countries, you're going to have to travel no matter what for some tournaments. And, if you're going to be serious about competing in VGC, then you're just going to have to buckle down for some of these events, and you'll have to travel, going into regionals and continental championships and worlds, of course. But I hope we provided a satisfactory answer to your question. And speaking of questions, guys, if you guys have them for the show, we'd be happy to answer them. We'll take them, whatever you guys have. Probably VGC related would be nice, but, we'll be open-minded about that kind of thing. But that wraps up our very first Roar of Time, a special edition of the Hyper Voice. We hope you guys enjoyed listening to hearing stories about old VGC seasons and players, and fortunately we're both Mike and I are still playing now currently, so that was kind of nice to at least reference. Mike, we also forgot you're also a 4-time world qualifier. Other than the 2009 season, you also had 2011, 2014, and 2016.
That's right. Although I wasn't lucky enough to be able to go this year, but I very much hope to go next year when Sun and Moon is available.
I'm sure we're all looking forward to that.
We're all looking forward to it. Obviously, strong resume as a player for yourself. It was great to have you on our very first history segment. I felt, it's very appropriate to do one of VGC's first seasons. We'd love to do more Roar of Times. I enjoyed talking about some of these old Pokemon teams, and basically that will do it for our show. Mike, if people wanted to follow you on Twitter, where could people do that?
That will be on my Twitter handle, Pokemon_PhD. Pokemon PhD.
Pokemon PhD. Very nice. Hey, would you mind spelling that out? I wonder if people would be able to do that.
That's POKEMON_PhD.
Very nice. Thank you so much for being so helpful to our listeners.
Steven, Alex, it's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was really fun.
And Alex, people can follow you on Twitter.
At Lexicon VGC.
And lastly, you guys can follow me on Twitter at Super Morioka. That will do it for the Hyper Voice Roar of Time. Thank you guys for listening. Mike and Alex, if you guys could say goodbye for all the lovely people out there.
Goodbye, lovely people.
See you around. See you next time.
Once again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time for more of the Hyper Voice.